Okay, so you want to own a medieval blacksmith forge. Fire, iron, a trade every village needs. Here's the part nobody mentions. The guild that's supposed to protect you also controls your prices, your apprentices, and how fast you're allowed to work. This is what owning a forge actually looked like from the inside, not the craftsman's version, the cartels. Let's be precise about what you're buying because the romantic image, one independent craftsman, his own hours, his own hammer, is mostly wrong the moment you set up shop inside a town with a guild. In the countryside, a village smith might operate with real independence, answering only to the local lord and the demands of his neighbors. But the profitable version of this trade, the urban forge, serving a market big enough to specialize and prosper, sits inside a regulatory structure that controls almost every decision you'll make before you've lit a single fire. Before we go further, we need a ruler, the way we've needed one in every episode of this series. Medieval England ran on pounds, shillings, and pence. 12 pence to the shilling, 20 shillings to the pound, 240 pence to the pound total. An ordinary laborer in the 14th century earned somewhere around 2 to 4 pence a day for unskilled work. That's our ruler. Every cost in this episode we're going to measure in working days, because a pence meant nothing on its own. It meant something against a day's sweat. Now the shop itself. You need a forge, a hearth built to hold and control an intense, sustained fire, usually built into a stone or brick surround with a bellows-driven air supply. You need an anvil, and here's a real number. A blacksmith's anvil in the early 16th century cost about a pound, 240 pence. Bellows to work the fire cost another 30 shillings, 360 pence. Add a hammer at 8 pence, tongs, chisels, a slack tub for quenching, and files, and you're looking at a startup cost equivalent to hundreds of working days of ordinary labor before you've sold a single nail. And that's before rent on the shop itself, before the shed to keep your charcoal dry, before the stock of raw iron sitting in the corner, doing nothing but costing you money until someone walks in with a job. And the anvil and bellows are only the equipment that survives to be priced in later records. Every day the fire is lit, it needs feeding, and a smith's forge runs on charcoal, not firewood, because charcoal burns hotter and cleaner, exactly the way a Roman bathhouse's hypocaust ran on cordwood and never truly went cold. No clean medieval price series for a smith's charcoal bill survives the way it does for grain or cloth, and any channel that quotes you an exact daily charcoal cost is guessing. What we do know is the same principle that governed every furnace-based trade in this series. Fuel is a constant, unglamorous drain that runs whether you have 3 customers that day or 30, and a smith who misjudges his charcoal stock either wastes money on excess or loses a paying job because the fire won't hold long enough to finish it. Which brings us to your raw material, and it's worse than it sounds. Iron in this period isn't cheap, uniform stock. It arrives as bloomery iron, or imported bar iron, inconsistent in quality, requiring skilled judgment just to know what you're working with before you've forged anything at all. Every pound of iron sitting in your shop is capital tied up and doing nothing. Exactly like the caravan merchant's silver sitting idle in a warehouse. Exactly like the tavern keeper's ale spoiling in the cellar. The difference is your material doesn't spoil. It just sits there, expensive and unmoving until a customer's job justifies heating it. Now the staff, and this is where the trade gets interesting because your workforce isn't hired labor in the way a tavern hires servants. It's apprentices, and an apprentice isn't an employee. He's an investment with a contract attached. The 1345 Ordinance of the London Spurriers, a related metalworking trade, set standard apprenticeship terms at 7 years. 7 years, living in your household, trained by you, fed by you, and in return, rarely paid a wage at all during that period. You are, in effect, running a vocational school where the students work for free in exchange for tuition paid in room, board, and eventual trade secrets. That sounds like a windfall for you as master, and for years it functions like one. An apprentice in year 6 is producing skilled labor at top, the cost of feeding him. But you paid an entry fee to take him on in the first place, you're liable for his conduct in the town, and if he's incompetent or runs off, you've sunk years of food and training into nothing. Here's the part the romantic version really leaves out. None of this, the anvil, the bellows, the 7-year apprentice pipeline, happens outside the guild's permission. Guild ordinances, recognized and enforced by city authorities, regulated apprenticeships, set prices and wages, established quality standards enforced by inspectors who could search your shop for inferior goods, settled disputes among members, and maintained the trade's monopoly against outsiders. That last part matters more than it sounds. The guild wasn't just watching you, it was actively preventing new smiths from setting up shop freely, which protected you from competition, but only as long as you played played by every other rule it imposed in exchange. And the rules bit both ways. By controlling how many apprentices any master could take on, guilds directly controlled the labor supply, which kept wages from crashing during a slow decade, but also kept you from scaling up production even in a good one. You couldn't simply hire 3 more hands and triple your output the way a modern business owner would. The number of hands you were allowed was fixed by men who weren't you, meeting in a hall you didn't control. Let's put a face on the enforcement because it's not theoretical. Guild wardens' accounts survive recording fines assessed on masters for disobedience to the wardens or for infringing trade regulations, alongside the fees paid for taking on an apprentice, for an apprentice completing his term, and for a smith's eventual entry into the freedom of the city. Every stage of your career as a smith has a toll attached, collected by the same organization that's supposedly protecting your livelihood. Work too fast, undercut a fellow smith's price, take on an unauthorized extra apprentice. And the fine isn't a suggestion. It's enforced with the same civic authority that enforces contracts and debts. So here's your base revenue. And it's exactly as unglamorous as the tavern's quadrants at the door or the bathhouse's single coin. Nails, horseshoes, hinges, simple tool repair. Individually, these jobs are small, priced by guild set rates you didn't negotiate, and they will not make you rich one at a time. A horseshoe here, a mended hinge there, is a rounding error against the hundreds of working days you sank into your anvil and your apprentice pipeline. If this were the whole business, most smiths would starve slowly behind their own forge. But watch what actually pays. First, volume from a captive local market. Every farm needs horseshoes replaced on a schedule, every cart needs iron fittings maintained, every household needs hinges, hooks, and simple tools repaired constantly in a world where nothing is disposable. You are not selling one horseshoe. You are selling a subscription to every horse in the parish, whether anyone calls it that or not. Second, specialized commission work. Weapons, armor components, precision tools for other trades, locks, all priced far above simple nail work, all requiring the skill only a master, not an apprentice, can deliver, and all exactly the kind of job that justifies the years you spent training. Third, and this is the one the independent craftsman myth erases entirely, contract work for institutions. Manor accounts and borough records show smiths retained by lords, monasteries, and town authorities for ongoing maintenance work, plows, cart fittings, building ironwork, paid not per item, but as an ongoing arrangement. That's not a customer, that's a retainer. And a retainer is worth more than 100 walk-in nail orders because it's predictable. Manorial price lists from around 1350 give us a concrete anchor for what this individual work was actually worth. A single foot iron for a plow, one small component among dozens a working farm needed maintained, is recorded at around 5 pence. Multiply that across every plow, cart axle, oil, and gate hinge on a working manor, maintained year-round, under a single standing arrangement with the Lord's steward, and you can see why a retained manorial smith, paid an annual fee for exclusive service, rather than haggling over each nail, sat in a fundamentally more stable position than a smith relying entirely on whoever walked through the door that week. Fourth, and this is where the guild stops being purely a cost and starts being an asset. Membership itself is valuable precisely because it's exclusive. Once you've paid your entry fees and served your obligations, the same monopoly that limited your apprentices also blocks a stranger from opening a rival forge across the street and undercutting you into ruin. You paid for a locked door. Once you're inside it, that lock works for you. Now, knowing all of it, the risks, and they come from every direction a business this size can be hit. First threat, fire itself, which is darkly appropriate. Your entire trade depends on maintaining an intense controlled flame inside a building made substantially of wood next to a stock of charcoal in a town where your neighbors' homes share walls or narrow alleys with yours. A forge fire that gets away from you doesn't just destroy your shop. Urban fire regulations in this period existed specifically because trades like yours were understood to be a standing risk to the entire street. Second threat, material risk that never really goes away. Iron is inconsistent stock, and a batch that turns out flawed once heated and worked can ruin hours of skilled labor and the raw material cost with it. Unlike the tavern's spoiled ale, you can't smell the problem in advance. You find out mid-forge after you've already spent the fuel and the time. Third threat, the apprentice gamble. You've committed years of food, training, and household space to a boy who might turn out brilliant, or might prove clumsy, dishonest, or simply leave for another master mid-term. And guild records of fines and disputes suggest this went wrong often enough to need a formal system for settling it. Fourth threat, and the one that makes this trade different from every other business in this series. The guild itself is a wall you can fall on the wrong side of. Undercut a fellow master's price even accidentally, take on an apprentice you weren't authorized for, produce substandard work that fails an inspector's search, and the fine lands on you regardless of intent. The same organization protecting your monopoly can with equal authority take a meaningful slice of a bad year's profit as punishment for playing the game wrong. Fifth threat, and it's the quiet one. Your capital is almost entirely illiquid. Unlike the tavern keeper's ale or the caravan merchant's silk, your wealth is locked into an anvil, a set of tools, and a half-trained apprentice sitting in your own household, none of which can be quickly converted back into cash if a bad season hits. A tavern can water down the ale to stretch a thin month. A blacksmith can't shrink an anvil. Your fixed costs are, in the most literal sense, fixed, forged, and sitting in your shop whether business is good or not. Now the ledger, reconstructed the way we've done for every other business in this series. No complete medieval forge account book survives intact enough to build a clean annual statement, so this, like the others, is a model built from attested pieces. The good year. Steady walk-in trade covers your basic costs and then some. You've secured one institutional retainer, a manor, or a monastery, paying you an ongoing rate for maintenance work that doesn't depend on foot traffic. Your senior apprentice is in his 5th or 6th year, producing skilled output at minimal cost to you. No fires, no ruined batches, no guild fines. Put a rough shape on it. Dozens of small walk-in jobs a week at a few pence each. A standing manorial retainer, worth the equivalent of many plow iron repairs bundled into one annual fee, and a trained apprentice effectively doubling your output at almost no marginal labor cost. Across a year like this, a master smith with an established shop, retainer income, and no disasters could plausibly clear a living several times better than an unskilled laborer's wage, converting your years of training and your guild membership into a genuinely comfortable position in the town's middle rank, the kind of standing that shows up in tax assessments and civic office roles. The bad year. Your apprentice runs off in year 4, taking your training investment with him and leaving you a fine to settle with the guild over his conduct. A batch of flawed iron ruins a commissioned piece for a paying customer who won't be back. A fire scare, even one that doesn't destroy your shop, damages your relationship with jumpy neighbors and invites a costly inspection. And somewhere in the middle of all this, you're fined for a pricing dispute you didn't think was a dispute at all. The fixed costs, the rent, the charcoal, the iron stock sitting idle don't care that the year went badly. They arrive regardless, the same way the tavern's rent arrived regardless of how many travelers showed up. Unlike the tavern keeper, though, you can't simply water down a barrel to survive a thin month. Your capital is locked into an anvil that doesn't shrink, and an apprentice contract you can't quietly dissolve, which means a bad year here tends to compound rather than merely pinch. So who actually got rich in this trade? Not the smith who stayed a jobbing craftsman his whole life, mending hinges and shoeing horses one at a time. The men who did well were the ones who moved beyond single-item sales entirely, securing institutional retainers, training multiple apprentices into a small workshop rather than working solo, and eventually using guild seniority itself as a form of capital, rising into the wardenship, the very body that set prices and fines, and from there influencing the rules instead of merely obeying them. The blacksmiths who show up prosperously in later tax and property records aren't remembered for a single brilliant sword. They're remembered for owning the workshop, training the next generation of masters, and sitting eventually on the side of the table that wrote the fines instead of paying them. Compare the two paths side by side, and the gap isn't subtle. The solo jobbing smith spends decades converting pence into pence, one horseshoe at a time, with every fixed cost, the rent, the charcoal, the idle iron stock, eating into a margin that never really grows no matter how skilled his hands get. The workshop-owning warden converts the exact same skill into something structurally different, a training pipeline that produces its own future customers and future guild votes, a retainer income that arrives whether or not anyone walks through his door that week, and a seat at the table that decides what everyone else in the trade is allowed to charge. Same fire, same anvil, same 7-year apprenticeship system. One version of this career tops out mending gate hinges for pennies. The other tops out owning a piece of the rulebook. Could you get rich owning a medieval blacksmith forge? Yes, if you understood that the hammer was never the asset, the guild seat was. The retainer contracts were. The apprentice pipeline, treated as a training business rather than free labor, was. No, if you thought skill alone would carry you, because a brilliant smith who never secured steady institutional work, never advanced within the guild, and never trained his own apprentices into the next generation of paying customers was just a very talented man mending hinges for pennies, one at a time, forever. Go back to that London Spurrier's Ordinance from 1345, the one that fixed the apprenticeship term at 7 years for a trade that wasn't even blacksmithing, just its closed metalworking cousin. Someone sat in a guild hall and decided exactly how long a young man's unpaid labor should be worth to his master, in writing, enforceable by the city itself. That's the honest center of this trade, not the ring of the hammer on the anvil. The ordinance sitting quietly in a drawer, deciding, long before any fire was lit, exactly how this business was allowed to work.